let me open it up to the audience. The questions are clear. What have been important and enlightening points in our debate? What was missing and what do we need to come back to in the future? Please.
First of all, thank you very much for this conference, which I found very, very interesting.
Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Manfred Speth. I'm working as a consultant and have been working for a long time within the federal government and the public management sphere. So that's what I'm. That's my subjective perspective, with which I listened with great interest. And as I said, I want to thank you. But when I'm thinking about whom should I thank you, is it what kind of space is this one here? Should I thank to the demos people, or should I thank to the American government, which, by the way, obviously also supported this conference? Should I thank to the Hertie Foundation, or should I thank to the colleagues sitting here that are part of the federal or Berlin subsidized universities? In other words, what is interesting is that you organized a conference which precisely showed the close interaction between, say, for example, foundations, say, for example, government or whatever public subsidized institutions, and you showed, in particular, you focused on the kind of a new public space that is forming in form of, for example, network, in form of the arts, etc., etc. Coming from my point of view, which I found not missing, because you couldn't deal with all of these different subjects, but with a subject which probably could then be developed later on. That is, what does all this mean for the established bureaucracies where I came from? Or what does it mean for the established parliaments? Or what does it mean for the new European space? In other words, what do you do with all these old reactionary or old-fashioned looking guys like me, just to try to be a bit more concrete? Professor Barber mentioned as one of the missing parts democratic leadership. And I think this is very an apt comment, because coming from the public management sphere, I, from the German point of view, am particularly struck about the mode now to transfer the term leader into bureaucratic institutions. I have, for example, read Giuliani, and I've read the books of Giuliani and of Powell, who both depict themselves as a leader. And coming from a very technocratic point of view, I ask myself, what is this leadership? And if you look, for example, at the UK nowadays, also the term leader is very in. But what does it mean? It means more or less a guy who is an absolutely up-to-date manager, who is into the interactive business, who looks not only what the minister wants, but who looks also what his subordinates want. In other words, it is a sort of a progressive idea connected with it, but has nothing to do with the accountability towards a public space in the wider region. And that leaves people like me with a question: what would this discussion mean for the old-fashioned bureaucracies, or for the old-fashioned parliamentarians? Even the most progressive guys within the bureaucracy somehow feel annoyed if they constantly are forced to give accountants. They they envision that the public influence in the traditional way, for example, a member of the parliament wants to know precisely what kind of money you spend for what reasons. On one hand, that's a good thing. On the other hand, a bureaucrat, if he gets these questions from day to day, feels annoyed because he can't really concentrate or focus on his work. I don't judge that point of view, I just reflect it. In other words, what chances, what perspectives leaves this new brave world which you kind of try to explore for these guys? I know, of course, Hertie Government School tries to bring people from the federal government together with political scientists, etc., which is a very good thing, but it would be interesting for your further work, in order to explore what constitutes a public space, if you also would include these old-fashioned looking guys, which are not mere technocrats, but that also are constituted now by young people who, of course, also were brought up in this networking age, but now they have the difficulties in order to accommodate that what they would privately do with the new official function. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We collect the next slide.
Just a response to that very interesting comment. Ben says that not only democracy is contested, but I guess a lot of the terms within it and in our discussion of public space are contested, including leadership. An anecdote, my university assembled a huge committee to deal with the issue, some thought of it as a problem, of civic education. Ben mentions this, that's been kind of curiously absent. So we got together, there's one student on the committee, which I thought was kind of stunning. And so all of the adults, most of them were my age or not too much younger, focused on leadership. And to his credit, this one student had the courage to raise his hand in this kind of intimidating setting and said, in my generation, we don't value leadership the same way you do. He said, there are a lot of things we could do with civic education. We'd like to know how to organize. We'd like to know how to inform ourselves. We want to know how to take effective action. But we don't need leaders to do that. Now, I'm just putting that out there so that we see that there may be changing conceptions of citizenship itself. Contested conceptions, to be sure, they're not static and sitting on shelves in libraries, but that many people are thinking citizenship is generationally shifting, and that one of the elements of that shift that is being left behind, for better or worse, is the concept of leadership and how we constitute organization. So just putting it out there.
Thank you. Further comments, please.
My name is Frank Hertie, being delegated from the Foreign Office to the Berlin Senate as an advisor on Global Cities Networks. I want first also to express my admiration for this conference. It was very rich and very interesting. And being somewhat an outsider to the academic discourse, or at best an associate in a way, I want to concentrate now on these aspects which I have the feeling could be important for future discussions on it. And that is mainly, I think, the impact of globalization on the transformation of the public space. Taking up the point that there's a close relation between public space and democracy, I think, or I had the feeling, as far as I participated in the different panels, that there was always the implication as if the body politic, or the polity, be constant. The understanding, more or less, that it is the nation state. And I have the feeling that not only the public space is transforming itself, but the body politic is transforming itself. So that makes two elements open for the future, and we have somehow to clarify in which relation to each other they are transforming themselves. And with respect to that, I think two elements which are very much constitutive to public space as well as body politic were not so much elaborated on it. The first is language, I think, and the second is the market. If one language is obviously one of the constitutive elements of the founding of the nation state. So if we are looking for what is globally developing as body politic, the fact that in the internet language really becomes is becoming lingua franca worldwide, and more and more people can engage in public debates. This is a very important element for constituting a global public space. It's only very few. And the second, obviously, is a market. Bigger markets were constituted for the nation state. I think the market is also one of the constitutive elements of a global body politic as far as that. And I think we have to, and the impact of the internet on both is obvious.
Thank you. There are two, first you and
I urge you to look into the complexity of dialogue and distinction and decision making. And with the International Federation of System Research, all systems researchers, there were discussions, social dialogue they called it, to really look into the requisite variety, parsimony, saliency, meaning, distinction making, and evolution of observation. Working in a group where I spoke with Ben about Senator Harris, his wife is the chief of the Indians, LaDonna Harris, where they look into the observational variety, the cognitive limitations, and the relative saliency of decision making. If we leave one of these factors out and don't go more holistically to the issues at stake, we are blind or one-eyed.
Thank you. Justin.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've been quite captivated by this proposal to get away from the dichotomy of public versus private space and Jürgen Koch's idea of a potential continuum of different types of spaces and their relationships. And I think that has important implications for our discussion on the decline of public space, which is related to the privatization of public space, and whether if we introduce this idea of a continuum of spaces being a mix of both, what that means. And to me, this is also related to the panel on immigration and migration and citizenship, where it looks like there are places in Europe and in North America where different groups of people are calling for their own public space. And what does that mean when one group is calling for a public space for themselves? Is it still public? And what is this on a continuum? And then also, how does that relate to the concept of safe space, which we haven't really brought up yet? And how is safe space related to the sort of public space definition by different groups?
Okay, thank you. No, you have first then.
My name is Marco Navas from the Latin America Institute in FAU, in the Freie University Berlin. Many countries are very complex societies. I think in Latin American example when I say that, where there are no one logic of democracy. There's a constellation of public spaces. There's a juxtaposition of public spaces. There are also a transition from one form of governance to another form of governance. The question is, with this complexity, how we can hold the analysis for public spaces with this complexity. That needs, I think, a heterodox approach. And the concrete question then is, it will be possible to combine theoretical and normative with pragmatical approaches?
Thank you. Martin, next second.
What I would like to underline is what was discussed in this session, actually, the issue of conflicts in public space. I think that's really something productive to dwell on at some point in the future. So the idea that public spaces are contested, that one has to bring out that there are people trying to dominate, or groups trying to dominate public spaces, and that one must bring out how that works, but also to see if the publicness of spaces can be enhanced. So if any, say, political institution is sort of the result of the last social conflict, then the question always is, if they are able to address these conflicts and come to sort of cooperation, what exclusionary rules are inherent in the way they function. And so the contestedness of spaces, and to think about how conflicts are manifest and how you can actually learn from them to deal with conflict, I suppose, is something that came up mostly in the migration issue, but is, I think, a very productive notion that a lot of the literature, for instance, in the Chicago school tradition that was done on public space, was precisely on handling conflicts in urban public space, and that, I think, is one of the reasons why that was such a productive literature.
Thank you. Two more, and I think that we have to close the list. Please.
Oliver Schmidt, well, thank you very much for framing such a lively conference. You had a long list already of wishes for further panels. I want to just add one concept that popped up in a lot of sessions, but perhaps would warrant a panel of its own. The old-fashioned idea of the economics of space, the economics of public space. Who owns cyberspace? Who owns the very land that, say, Zandig was talking about that he wants to keep open to the public? So the old concept of economics, I would like to see further explored in further discussions.
Okay, thank you. And finally.
As the audience member, I guess, with the last word, let me thank all of the participants and the presenters in the conference on behalf of the audience for a very intellectually stimulating and rewarding couple of days, and especially the organizers for putting on such an interesting event. I'll try to be as brief as I can, and necessarily, therefore, just suggestive. But another concept, or perhaps analytic frame, that has been missing from the discussion is what I would call, for shorthand at least, perhaps a feminist frame. This raises some interesting questions about the notions of public, of space, of democracy in ways that Ben alluded to and in ways that I think become fundamental. For instance, from a feminist point of view, one of the most classically private spaces, the domestic space of the household, must essentially become a political space, a space where freedom and equality can come to be recognized, if there is to be something like democracy in the public sphere. This re-problematizes in a certain kind of very important way this question of what democracy really is. The underlying notion that we've heard repeatedly throughout the course of these 3 days, while contested, has nonetheless strongly favored a conception of democracy as collective control. But there are, again, other historically very viable and important conceptions of democracy that have been missed, one of which an emancipatory conception of democracy, views democracy as aiming towards ends like freedom and equality, and views public control, public decision-making, collective decision-making as one important means to helping to ensure freedom and equality for people, but especially in the context of globalization, especially in the context of issues about domestic politics, and I mean that in the sense of the family, these private spaces where democracy is also very fundamental, raises this very important question again in a very different sort of way. And so I would urge us maybe as we think forward coming out of this conference to also keep these fundamental questions on the front burner, perhaps, rather than on a conceptual back burner. Thanks again.
Thank you. So in the final round, we ask all four of the panelists for a short concluding comment. Ben, would you start and we end this?
Very short, because I know we're running over and we have to leave. I want to remind people how far we've come since the 1970s when Samuel Huntington, the same Samuel Huntington of the misguided work Clash of Civilizations, wrote an even more misguided work about democratic overload. The central proposition of the 1970s was that there was too much democracy. You know, how could you have less? And these were the same neocons who actually have been in power recently. So it's interesting, we've moved from one space to another. The globalization issue, I think, was on the table, but we really need to focus on it more, obviously, because it's absolutely central, and a number of you pointed to that, and I think that's right. Several people talked about the language issue and clarifying language and so on, and that seems to me to be absolutely crucial. On the one issue, several people talked about civil society maybe as a space where the declinist thesis doesn't, we privatized the public, but civil society has somehow flourished. My own view is the opposite. My own view is actually, despite the talk of the decline of the public sphere has gotten larger, and the private sphere has gotten larger, and civil society has actually gotten squeezed in between them. So it looks like an hourglass. On either side of the hourglass, you have big government, big business, and civil society getting smaller and smaller, in the realm of citizenship actually being constrained at that point. And so from my point of view, the declinist thesis, actually, and that's what Putnam says about social capital, works very strongly when you talk about, this is Jocelyn to you, when you talk about civil society, actually we have less of it, not more of it. Finally, to come back to, I think, actually, I thought one additional missing thing that's implicit in so many comments, power. We haven't, we political scientists, Laswell once thought it was, the essence of political science was power, who gets it, when, where, and how. But very often we end up not talking about power. Issues of monopoly, issues of ownership, who owns the internet, who owns public space, is absolutely essential. We often talk about it as if it's a free commodity, a free-floating commodity, and all we have to do is claim it, occupy it, and it's ours. When in fact somebody else who understands power better than us got there first. And generally those are private corporations who understand power extremely well, and government that also understands power. They are often already there in ways that make it very hard for civil society to occupy that space. So power is an issue we certainly have to talk about.
Thank you. Two remarks on my part. First, what was missing, and we were aware that it is missing, and we could not squeeze it in, and maybe we should have more explicitly than we have, is are the social sciences and academia in general part of the public sphere? Are they public spaces? There is, for 4 or 5 years now in America, a big literature launched originally by Michael Borowoy on public sociology, and how social sciences more generally, including economics and including history, can function and prepare themselves for functioning as what I have called rating agencies in the service of citizenship. We have not addressed this, but this is such an important question that I think it is day-to-day encounter with this question. Second, the question of language that Frank Hertie brought up and was also in the background of much of our discussion. And here we deal with the, tragic perhaps unsurmountable, but consequential fact that the people who we can talk to is always a much smaller universe than the people whom we stand in some interaction with, market interaction for instance. So language is limited, not just because we speak German, English and whatever else, but the very act of speaking in public refers to a smaller universe than the interdependencies that we are involved in. With these two remarks, I pass on to Ulrich.
Well, two remarks as well. I just reflect what was discussed in the audience. First of all, I would say to Martin, that's correct. I mean, that's also what I emphasize very much. The public space as a contested space. That's, and I gave some examples for that. But we must not confuse this issue, namely the contestedness of public space, from the other issue, namely that public space is an area where conflicts are well, not necessarily resolved, but are dealt with. I mean, the fact that the public sphere is a sphere where social conflicts are dealt with is one issue, but that's something new. That the public sphere as such has become a contested place and contested spaces. That's a much more serious question and something which is new. The second remark is about trust. I have the impression that people who stress who emphasize the significance and the importance of trust do no longer trust the public as a sphere in which trust is generated. So I have the impression that trust is something which has to be added and which must be added to the normal functioning of public sphere and of legality. The clear example is, of course, Mokos. He was very impressive, but in a way, it's also a sign that he doesn't have trust enough in the working of legality and the normal public authority as it has been established in a democratic issue. So that a policy of moral persuasion has been added. Well, this has been largely acclaimed, and it's really impressive, and that's a kind of an example of democratic leadership, but it's very ambivalent. I am quite skeptical about that, because it's kind of having no trust in democratic institutions or in the public sphere, which is organized by legality, and which in itself is supposed to generate trust among citizens, and that means civic trust.
Thank you.
Okay, let me briefly address three questions. The first one, how does all this relate to the perspective, to the experiences of a normal decision maker in the administration and the parliament? I mean, my feeling is the strongest challenge is that, let's put it this way. Recall again the title of Habermas' book of 1962. It is a book about the public space. I think this conference made overly clear that there are now numerous and a high number of public spaces, and there is not only contestation within those public spaces, but between the public spaces. And I think that's an enormous challenge, because those people you were talking about have now the enormous task of essentially managing the interface between all those public spaces and taking different public spaces into account. It's not anymore only one, but it is the additional problematic of getting a view on different public spaces. So I also would again like to highlight it is not only contestation within a public space or the contestation of the concept of public space, it's also contestation between different public spaces, which is a fundamental problem. The second issue I would like to take up by Frank Hertie, the body of politics is changing as well through globalization, through the rise of international institutions. Yes, that is absolutely true, and it is important because it shows, in my view, coming back to decline versus transformation, that transformation is not only descriptively true, that transformation takes place, it is of course also necessary. Some form of transformation is necessary because politics is changing. I mean, the old national public is not able to handle the problem of global issues. So therefore, transformation is an element which is needed. The question, of course, is what kind of transformation? And there, a number of issues are open. Finally, the question was, whom do we have to thank to? Let me give my perspective on this. First of all, you're right, the American Embassy supported us, so thank you to the American Embassy. Secondly, thank you to Ben Barber and Civ World and Demos for this, what I think, wonderful cooperation. Thank you, of course, also to the Hertie Foundation for funding the Hertie School, but above all, I think, and Ben will agree, thanks to Klaus Offe for taking the lead in the organization and for the team with Axel Rüttimann. The whole conference would have been not possible without this lead and without the organization. So.